So I thought that this was another fantastic episode. I am really loving season 2 so far. This episode starts off with its titular battle of the Burning Mill, but we don't actually see it. We see the Bracken Blackwood twink spat that started it all off, and then we immediately cut to the gruesome aftermath. This is reminiscent of the Battle of the Whispering Wood in the first season of Game of Thrones, where Tyrion was knocked out for budget reasons and then woke after the battle was over. And I think that this is an even more effective use of it because it is used to highlight the stark difference between the before and after of this gruesome incident of mass violence. Of course, the Brackens and the Blackwoods have been feuding for centuries. We hear this in this episode that no one can even remember how it truly began. And at a certain point, it does not matter because these conflicts take on a life of their own and perpetuate down through generations. Technically, Luke taking Aemond's eye was the first blood spilled between the two sides of this conflict, but of course, Luke and Aemond were both children, and that fight arose from a convergence of circumstances based on the pre-existing tensions in their family. And also, children just being children, and emotions running high. This particular rift in the family opened when Viserys married his teenage daughter's best friend and had a trueborn son by her. But Targaryen succession conflicts have gone back generations. And we see on both sides that the younger generation is very eager to take action. Jace seems disappointed that his mother isn't sending in the dragons. Baela takes it on herself to chase down Cole. Aegon and Aemond are obviously peeved about being told that they can't go into battle. This family is at a precipice where one wrong move could spiral out of control and ignite the realm. Okay, that was 3 different metaphors. The first battle of this war may have already occurred, but dragons have not been brought in yet. This is a self-annihilating conflict where neither side can truly win. We've seen escalating examples of this with the Eric battle and then the Brackens and the Blackwoods. And once dragons come into that, the collateral damage to the realm will be immeasurable. I really loved the cut between Eric and Arik in their grave to cristoncole looking down, as he was the one whose mission sent them there. I can't understand why people say that this show isn't funny. I have laughed out loud several times in these past episodes. Maybe it's just because the humor is more in situational absurdity than people making obvious jokes, but I burst out laughing when I saw that Aegon made his boys into the Kingsguard. He's so dumb. We saw dysfunction in both the Green and Black councils this episode. Aegon wants to send his dragons into battle where his counselors advise against it, whereas Rhaenyra's counselors urge her to send in the dragons, but she refuses. cristoncole, with his new status as hand, lays out the battle plan that he and Aemond had come up with, minus vhagar, which Aemond is none too pleased about. We see that Aemond still has no small council ball. Aegon has given him a seat at the table, but he is still not really part of the team. After being rebuffed himself, he is condescending towards his brother, which I think later fuels Aegon's paranoia. Also, the coin he's playing with is the same coin he found in his room after Blood and Cheese. It has a 9-pointed star on it, which I'm still trying to figure out if that symbol means anything. Probably doesn't. It's probably just a prop, but if anyone has any intel on that, it's really just a symbol that his crush is thinking about him. We also got another Darren mention, and specifically mentioned Targaryen, although they did not name her. But Darren's dragon is named Targaryen. She's the Blue Queen, and I love her. Both sides are aware of the implications of bringing in dragons. Cole specifically mentions that if they have a dragon in the field, the other side will be more likely to bring in dragons too. Both sides also have to consider the risks and rewards of sending their monarch or their heir into battle themselves. Westeros is a patriarchal society that values shows of strength, so Aegon flying into battle would help legitimize him in the eyes of the people, but he is also the monarch, and if something happens to him, who knows what will happen then. Rhaenyra is reluctant about sending Jace, her heir, into battle, although that probably also has to do with having just lost a son. Neither Aegon or Rhaenyra is really taken seriously by their counselors. maybe in different ways. Rhaenyra's is clearly primarily due to sexism, with the men in her council going as far to suggest that she just go away while they do the war. Even the men fighting for her claim do not truly respect it. I do think there are valid reasons to question Rhaenyra's strategy here, because the war already has begun. Yes, you want to avoid dragon war at all costs, but you need to have a solution that isn't just the other side surrenders because dad said I'm the rightful queen. But the condescending attitudes from the men on her small council show that she would be fighting for their respect no matter what.
I'm as fearsome as any of them.
Aegon isn't taken seriously by his small council, mostly because he's very dumb. Rhaenyra's best and worst qualities are on display in this episode. She does deeply care about her family, but there are limitations on who that care is extended to. Baela and Rhaena are clearly of lesser value to her than her natural born children. Rhaenyra is incredibly callous towards Rhaena.
You must take the little ones further. To Pentos, I think.
When my mother died.
It is safer than anywhere in Westeros.
Imagine how young Rhaenyra would have felt about being asked to take on this task. And maybe this is something that is ultimately necessary. I don't blame Rhaenyra for trying to protect her young sons, and it is true that because Rhaena doesn't have a dragon, there is not much she can do on Dragonstone. But Rhaenyra could at least show compassion to her stepdaughter and first cousin.
I cannot promise to make you happy, but I ask you, make this sacrifice willingly.
Using people as tools is part of being a monarch in a feudal society, and sometimes that even extends to your own family. My heart really went out to Rhaena in this episode because Rhaena is still the only Targaryen who isn't a small child who doesn't have a dragon, and that is clearly weighing on her. Dragons are the symbol of Targaryen's power, and she feels useless and meaningless in this family without one. Also, just having a dragon is so cool. I want a dragon, you guys. I think I should have one. I'm a triple fire sign. Baela and Rhaena are very Sansa and Arya coded in the books, and now we have Rhaena heading to the Vale to serve as a maternal figure to younger relatives. Caring for children is an incredibly important and valuable task, but it is not given the same amount of respect as flying into battle. Baela, on the other hand, is very happy to take on her mission, even too happy, as she kind of goes against Rhaenyra's orders when she chases down Cole and Gwaine. Maybe even too eager, as she goes against Rhaenyra's commands to stay high and not engage when she chases down Cole and Gwaine. Despite her issues with Daemon, Baela is still very much her father's daughter. Helaena is too good for this world or any of these people. I really love what they have done with her character here. Fia Saban continues to be absolutely phenomenal in this role. In the book, Helaena descends into madness after the murder of her son. She is solitary and inconsolable and doesn't really play much of a role in the story going forward. Since they have made these changes to her character, perhaps they will change her storyline too. I have some thoughts about that are more spoilery, so I'll save them for another time. She is clearly not doing well, but the horror that she has been through has only made her more compassionate. She shows a genuine empathy towards the small folk, unlike Aegon, who basically cares to the level of his own validation. She offers compassion to her mother, saying, "I forgive you." Now, it is unclear what this "I forgive you" applies to exactly. Is it about her affair with Cole? Is it about her general failings as a mother, or something yet to come? Helena's prophetic abilities and her dreams still haven't been fully explored by the narrative, and I am hoping we will get more of that. I am getting very nervous that we are just erasing Dreamfyre, Helena's dragon, from this narrative. That will make me very sad. Dreamfyre is one of my favorite dragons. She might not play as big a role in the war as other dragons, but she does get a very significant and important moment later on. So, Cristoncole has a fun new haircut. He's out of the castle. He might actually be good at something. Things are looking up for him. And also, he is quite literally looking up because he's being chased by dragons, and I love to see it. In this episode, we also formally meet Gwaine, Alicent's brother. We did technically see him in the first episode. He was jousting against Daemon, and then Daemon took out his horse's legs. Daemon's just a really cool, morally gray dude. Gwaine seems like he's going to be a really fun, asshole, rich kid. Showing up in pristine, velvet covered armor just says so much. The Hightowers are a very wealthy and powerful family, even apart from the crown, and this is a good reminder of that. Even his horse has fancy horse armor. Here's hoping that horse fares better than his tourney horse from the first episode. Fuck you, Daemon Targaryen. Through Gwaine, we get a reminder of the classism, racism, and xenophobia that Cole has experienced as a common-born man of Dornish heritage.
And by a man from such modest beginnings. What a giddying ascent the gods have bestowed on you. No one is more delighted than I to march out to war with the Dornishmen.
It's not something the show highlights very often, but I do think it's a very important part of his character. He doesn't have a powerful family to fall back on, and no matter how high he rises, people like Gwaine are always going to see him as lesser. We also get to see him actually be competent. He may really suck at guarding the king and his family, but he has solid martial instincts and he's very good in the field. So we finally made it to Harrenhal, and it is everything I could have ever had a supernatural sinister dream of. I am just so happy that on this show, in the weeks to come, it's going to be like, meanwhile, at the spooky castle with the witch. That is peak TV to me. That is amazing. That brings me so much joy in these dark times. Every show should have a spooky castle witch subplot, and this one is already so good. And of course, we meet the most important character on this show, Alice Rivers. She is beautiful. She is perfect. She is my wife. Forget Aegon and Rhaenyra. We should all be bending the knee to the Witch Queen of Harrenhal. I am so excited to see more of this character and his performance. Gail Rankin was incredible on Glow. She was my favorite. I literally fist pumped when I saw that she got cast in this role. She's going to be so amazing. I can't wait. I also just love the old gods, green seer, weirwood magic stuff. And we see that pretty much immediately with all of the weirwood roots that are growing through the stonework of Harrenhal. Weirwoods basically feed on blood sacrifice, and it is said that there is blood in the mortar of the stones of Harrenhal. So this is like a giant supercharged weirwood that is growing throughout an entire castle. Harrenhal looks different here than when we last saw it on this show and on Game of Thrones. We get a better sense of its truly immense scale here, and they have emphasized the ruin of the interiors as well as the exteriors. Harrenhal is a monument to the Targaryen legacy and the destructive power of dragons. It is a perfect centerpiece for this story. We see Daemon walking through the ruins that his ancestor wrought. At one point, he passes the room where the Great Council of 101 AC took place. The surrendering scene starring Sir Simon Strong was hilarious.
I'm claiming Harrenhal.
Apparently so.
I like that they are bringing in performers who have comedic chops to play some of these roles. We see the same with Gwaine or Ulf the White. There is a part where Daemon threw his fork across the room because he was being extra. Just classic. Matt Smith continues to shine in this role because he is not afraid to embrace the petty and pathetic parts of Daemon. I also thought it was very funny when Daemon asked to be called Your Grace.
My prince.
Your Grace.
What a diva. Hilarious. The dream sequence was incredible. I love it when dream sequences blend into waking life. We never actually see Daemon go to bed. He is wandering around checking the room for booby traps. When he hears the doors rattling, then he goes to investigate, and finds young Rhaenyra. She is actually wearing the same dress that she was wearing the first scene we ever saw them together in the first season, and the necklace he gave her in that scene. It's cool because in that lighting from certain angles, it kind of makes it look like her neck is severed as well as she stitches Jaehaerys' head back on. Having young Rhaenyra here instead of present day Rhaenyra, I think really works because this dream is being shaped by Daemon's guilt. Seeing Rhaenyra as the child he groomed highlights that. I also loved the dream logic of being in the hall in Harrenhal and then just walking in to what looked to be Rhaenyra's quarters in King's Landing. My interpretation was that Daemon sleptwalked to the weirwood and then woke up, and that last part where Alice tells him that he's gonna die in this place was actually real and awake, but it is unclear. I just cannot wait to find out next week what's going to happen at the spooky castle with the witch. Aemond has been somewhat frustratingly on the periphery so far this season. I really wish that the show had delved more into his reckoning with the fallout of Luke's death. Being a kinslayer is the gravest sin in Westeros, and it seems odd that they haven't delved into that a little bit more in the way he is now perceived. Historically, he becomes known as Aemond Kinslayer. We see Kinslayer thrown around as propaganda against Rhaenyra, but it seems weird, like maybe just the blacks being bad at politics, that they haven't utilized that at all. I think that the lack of screen time is in large part because he will be far more heavily featured in the back half of the season. But when I said I want to see more of Aemond Targaryen this season, that was not what I meant. And go off. I have zero issue with nudity. The question that I usually just ask myself is this relevant to the story or the characters at all, or is it just being done for titillation or shock value? House of the Dragon so far has handled sex and nudity far more responsibly and thoughtfully than Game of Thrones ever did. Thrones would have done something like that just to be edgy, but I do think there is significance for the character and this moment here. The nudity last week conveyed vulnerability, but this is strength and defiance, and I don't give a fuck what you say about me. Aegon may shield himself in his ancestors' armor, but Aemond is far more of a threat, standing there with just the sapphire in his eye. And it seemed deliberate that the close-up of him striding away was shot from the side of the sapphire eye. That effect still looks a bit uncanny to me, but it may just be nearly impossible to properly integrate a digital effect with someone's real face. I mean, if Ewan Mitchell really cared about this role, he would actually take out his own eye. Actors these days have no commitment to their craft. I will talk about this more when I get to spoilers at the end, but I do think this is a very pivotal moment for this character. Aemond has been an unexploded bomb of a person. Something was going to set him off eventually. And this experience makes sense as one that was rife with a bunch of deep-seated triggers and traumas. Aegon was the one who first took him to this brothel when he was 13 years old. In the world that these characters live in, this is a very common practice for boys and young men to be taken to brothels to be educated. But as a modern audience, we can see that 13 is incredibly young, and he was not really able to give consent here, especially because he was being pushed into it by his brother. This is an abusive and potentially damaging practice in many ways. The squire that Aegon and his boys are bringing to this brothel does not look particularly comfortable or enthusiastic. These adults just got this kid drunk and are dragging him to a brothel to have sex with a woman, regardless of whether that's what he wants. And many people who have these experiences at young ages have very complicated feelings about them, especially if they live in a society that doesn't give them the framework to process things. Not conceptualizing something as abuse doesn't preclude any psychological or emotional consequences. Not conceptualizing something as abuse doesn't preclude any emotional or psychological consequences. Even if the experience wasn't actively traumatic, it can interfere with a person's ability to understand and explore their own sexuality in a healthy way that can lead to a very complicated relationship with sex. And that's not to say that what Aemond is doing here is necessarily unhealthy. It's certainly a better coping mechanism than anyone else in his family has. Whatever the circumstances, Madame Sylvie was able to offer him comfort that he sorely needed. It was something deeply private and personal, and having it exposed and mocked like this is a huge violation, especially by the brother who has been his chief tormentor. It is unfortunate but unsurprising that he deflects to misogyny and degradation of Sylvie, saying that one whore is as good as another. It reflects Masaria's words from the previous episode that no matter what she does for them, powerful men will still only see her as a whore. He is still playing a part and trying to project strength in a patriarchal society. And now on to the somewhat controversial Sept scene with Rhaenyra and Alicent. I did enjoy it because I love seeing these characters and these actors playing off of each other. Overall, the decision to center the story around Alicent and Rhaenyra and the relationship, I think, was a good one, but it does mean they have to contrive circumstances to get these two characters together in the same room. This scene is a lot more about these two characters and their relationship and their arcs going forward than it is about the plot, per se. There was no hope of peace, really. This was a desperate last-ditch attempt from Rhaenyra's part. I think that the best way to approach this story is as an operatic tragedy. This show has always been a prestige soap opera with dragons, and I don't think that dressing up as a nun to sneak into a church to see your ex-girlfriend really violates its logic too much. We had Daemon waltzing in and out of King's Landing a couple weeks ago. It is contrived, to be sure, but it is in Rhaenyra's character that she would do something this impulsive and reckless. This was a desperate last chance effort to avoid a war, and tragically, it was too little too late. Alicent and Rhaenyra can't just kiss and make up and reunite the two sides of their families. This conflict has gotten bigger than either of them, and too big for either of them to stop, especially Alicent, who we see holds no real power at this point. The conflict is now too big for either of them to stop, especially Alicent, who we see has no real power anymore. Of course, there are parallels between this scene and the scene in the Sept between Alicent and Rhaenyra in the second episode of the first season. In that scene, Rhaenyra was confronting the loss of her mother, and this scene is very much about her confronting the loss of her father. Rhaenyra was probably harboring some doubts deep down about what if Viserys actually changed his mind, and this was the final reassurance she needed to know that she was his true and chosen successor. His final words were actually reaffirming Rhaenyra, but Alicent could not understand that from the context. Her misinterpretation was understandable given the circumstances, especially because we did get a conversation between Viserys and Alicent in the third episode of the first season, where he told her about a dream he had about Aegon and expressed doubt about naming Rhaenyra as his heir, that it would divide the realm. She genuinely believed that Viserys had changed his mind, but the reasons she genuinely believed it were rooted a bit in her self-delusion and desire to hear what she wanted to hear. It allowed her to ignore the other parts of what Viserys said that didn't make any sense. I have seen so many people frame this as Alicent starting a war over a misunderstanding, but that's not what happened here. The misunderstanding was only really relevant to Alicent's character and to the small council who used it as an excuse to do what they were already going to do regardless. They had been planning a coup for years. If Alicent had come into the council meeting and said, all right, Viserys is dead, time for Rhaenyra's coronation, they would have ignored her or even locked her up if she tried to stop it. And there is a good chance she would have gone along with it regardless. Alicent had solid reasons to fear for the safety of her sons if Rhaenyra took power. This wasn't done out of a desire for power on her part. I see Alicent as a character who very much does not want to feel powerless, but doesn't really want to exert power over other people. But believing that Viserys had changed his mind allowed her to go along with it and feel less conflicted and guilty. Reluctance to start a dragon war that will kill tens of thousands of people is not a weakness, and it is a credit to Rhaenyra that she understands the grave consequences of sending dragons to war. She does want to avert this, but the only way to truly stop the war at this point would be for one side to surrender, and neither side is going to do that. Rhaenyra truly believes that she is the rightful queen of Westeros, and even that she has some sort of messianic duty to sit the Iron Throne, and she believes that it would be justified, if not imperative, for her to seize that birthright with fire and blood. Aegon would never surrender at this point, not because he believes that he is the rightful king, but because he would not want to let go of the absolute power he now possesses. There is nothing Alicent could do short of poisoning her sons, and maybe that would be best for the realm, but we can't expect her to do that any more than we could expect Rhaenyra to kill her children. So, should Rhaenyra and Alicent have accepted that war was inevitable from the get-go, what is the right move here? Is it to pursue the smallest chance for peace, or is it to accept that the odds of war breaking out are pretty much even at this point and take a quick and decisive action to end the war as quickly as possible? Trying to prevent war at all costs is a good thing, but at what point must a leader accept that war is inevitable? I do think that this scene was vital for Rhaenyra as a character, for getting her to a place where she feels she needs to send her dragons to war. She now knows completely that her father did choose her, and that there is no chance of the Green surrendering. It also allows her to put some blame onto Alicent to assuage her guilt, to tell herself that she had no other choice. This scene might not have meaning to the larger plot, but it was vital for both of these characters in a way that justifies its existence. Okay, so now I'm going to discuss Fire and Blood spoilers. This is your spoiler warning. You have been warned. The main thing that I want to discuss in a spoiler section is attempted fratricide watch, because I think we're on for some attempted fratricide next week. It's something I have wondered about ever since reading Fire and Blood, if maybe at Rook's Rest, Aemond had kind of tried to kill, or at least let something happen to Aegon. It describes how Meleys and Sunfyre met in battle before vhagar arrived, so maybe he delayed a little bit in the hopes that Aegon would get hurt. Though I do think if they're going to do it, it has to be fully intentional. It can't be another vhagar oopsie. I was about 50-50 on attempted fratricide going into this season. Then all the stuff in the first episode with characters saying how loyal Aemond is bumped that up to about a 60-40. I thought that was very suspicious. And after this episode, I am at a yes. Honestly, watching this episode did make me kind of want to see Aegon get burnt. I love his character, but Aemond is my boy first and foremost. And it wasn't just his cruelty to Aemond. We also saw Diana, the serving girl who he assaulted, forced to serve him at the bar. Someone give her a gun. We've been given plenty of reminders of what a piece of shit he really is. But as I've said before, I think that Aegon's best character parallel from the main series is Theon. Theon is an awful person who does heinous things to characters we love, and we feel that we want to see brutal revenge taken against him. But actually seeing and sitting with the horror of what happens to him makes us reconsider whether any person actually deserves that. Seeing awful things happen to people we hate is not always the catharsis we think it's going to be, it's just more suffering. There are other things I want to talk about here, but I am running out of time and I have to go to work, unfortunately. So thank you so much to anyone who watched this until the end. I am so excited for the next episode. Mother is coming back to us, and I will be excusing all of her war crimes. Also, I can't wait to see what happens next week at the spooky castle with the witch. Also, I have some notes for the designers of that brothel really one note specifically, which is doors. All right, thanks. Bye.
You will die in this place.